to Connected Conversations for Creatives, a place where creatives like you can learn, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr. How do we define a creator? Are they born, made, or perhaps a bit of both? Our journey into creativity often takes unexpected turns, influenced by our experiences, passions, and sometimes even the labels others put on us. Today's guest is a man who embodies the essence of creative evolution. Dubbed the blue-collar poet, during his earlier years, his path was carved through the rugged landscapes of the Navy and the deck of oil tankers. But at the age of 37, he made a pivotal decision to exchange his toolbox for a pen and the physical world of wires and currents to the ethereal realms of literature. Pursuing an MFA in writing, he embarked on a new voyage, navigating the boundless sea of words, ideas, and emotions, going on to become an award-winning poet and a teacher. But his journey didn't end there. For his most recent work, Bill Cushing shed his poet's hat to don the mantle of an historical nonfiction writer. His latest narrative, Heroic Brothers of the Civil War, stands as a testament to his transformative journey, blending true historical facts with a personal touch that resonates deeply with him and his loved ones. As you think about the evolution of creativity, reflect on your own path. How has your past experiences shaped your artistic endeavors? Are you defined by the labels you carry, or do you try and rise above them to forge your own identity as a creator? Well, today I welcome back a familiar face, a literary friend whose journey continues to inspire us all, Bill Cushing. So thank you for joining me again in this third season of Connected Conversations for Creatives.
Yeah, well, thanks much for having me on, and always enjoy chatting with you. So.
I agree. And for those of you who are new listeners and are still working their way through older episodes and just haven't gotten to hear our last conversation, let's do the whole getting to know you thing. Tell us about yourself and kind of how you went from one place that is not where writers spend a lot of time to where all you do is write.
Well, I think retirement, of course, has a lot to do with that. But no, it's funny because I always wrote. I kept journals, diaries, things like notes and whatever. But yeah, I wouldn't say I really became a writer until I went back to school and really got into it seriously. But basically, although it's interesting because initially my plan was to major in journalism when I came out of high school. But those plans got a little sidetracked when I had a little too much fun my first semester and was asked not to come back.
That'll do it.
Yeah, and from there, and that here again at that time, Vietnam was going on, and my draft number was pretty low. So I figured, well, I better go ahead and enlist, and went into the Navy. And well, I come from a Navy family, of course, and my dad was in the Navy, and of course, Will in the book is a Navy, but yeah, I enlisted and actually kind of funny with the intention of going into the journalism corps. And when I got to boot camp, and anybody who's been through the service knows you request certain schools or whatever when you're in boot camp, and I came up there and very confidently said, I'm going to be a journalist. And the guy who was the clerk who was sitting with me after he got through laughing, he says, we don't need journalists, okay? Yeah. So what are you going to do? And I said, well, what am I qualified for? And he said, well, your scores are... I ended up becoming an electrician, which not a far stretch. My dad was an electronics engineer. I had worked for him during the summers. I was fairly handy. So it was a natural fall into position, and just became an electrician. And when I got out, I continued it. I enjoyed the work. I really loved the job. I thought it was one of the most fun jobs to have, until I had a couple of events that convinced me, you know what, the longer you stay in this kind of work, the more dangerous it becomes, and maybe it's time to... And it was funny because I took a job, which we were in Brooklyn. We moved down to Florida for the job, and the guy ended up just moving the company down there. And I became very good friends with a woman I met down there. And she kept, pushing me. She said, you got to go back to school. You love talking about books and music and movies, all this stuff. And I kept fighting. I said, look, I'm happy where I am. It's working out well. But then when we had those events, those few accidents, I said, yeah, maybe you're right. It's time to go back to school. So I took her advice and ended up, where I am now is taught for about 23 years. Well, I guess 26 actually, a couple of years high school and then college. I still do teach. But now, since I've retired, I've really had a good chance to devote to the writing.
And your main focus for the longest time has been poetry. You've been in the world of poetry. You've won awards for your poetry. I've got a book of your poetry, which I adore, and it's just sitting on my ottoman by my couch. And so I see it every single day. No, I love it. And so, but now your newest book, you've taken a pretty big shift here and delved into like historical nonfiction. So how has that worked for you?
Well, quite frankly, it's not that big a shift because when I got my MFA, it was focusing on creative nonfiction.
Okay.
I really felt when I got done with my bachelor's, which had focused on poetry, I said, well, let me try something else. And initially I was going to go novel, but then something happened. I just said, no, I'm going to move into the nonfiction. So this is not that big a stretch.
Okay.
It was the first, actually, it's the second nonfiction book I've published. The first one is a collection of my own personal stories. But this one is focused on two family members that were highly influential in the Civil War. And it's been percolating for years. And I finally went, let me put this together and try and get it out.
Well, there's got to be a lot of research that goes into something like this. Did you find yourself loving the research? Because not everybody loves research.
Well, I have to admit, I've always liked research. I'm one of those nuts who does enjoy it.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, I always tell my students, look, research is, you don't have to do a whole lot of work. You just have to find somebody else's.
Exactly.
The biggest task is just, focusing in on what you need to get your own point across. But I'd always, now, of course, William, who's the one on the right-hand side of the cover, who's the Navy guy, I was actually named in his honor. So I grew up with stories about him. And my dad had the book Lincoln's Commando, which was the Charles Van Doren book. In fact, if anybody's ever seen Quiz Show, there is a scene in there where he's being interviewed by an NBC reporter, and he says, I'm working on a new book about the Civil War, which is the book that my dad had. So I grew up reading that. Kind of a funny side story. I've always said, though, I want to have that book. When you pass away, I'd like to have that book. When I got to California, I was in a used bookstore, and I saw a copy of it that was in much better shape than the one my dad had, and had actually been signed by Van Doren. So I immediately scarfed that up and called my dad that night and said, hey, guess what? I got my own copy, and mine is actually topping yours.
That's hilarious. You can have yours back, Dad. No problem.
You can keep yours.
That's so funny.
And I grew up with stories about him and that sort of thing. Alonzo, who was the brother on the left, who was a little bit older than William, I really learned more about him in the 90s, I guess. It was the early 90s. There was a woman in Wisconsin, which is where they were from originally. They ended up moving to New York, but she actually bought the property that the family had owned prior to them moving to New York. And when she learned of what he had done, she started a crusade, really, to get him the Medal of Honor, which they finally did. He finally got it in 2014, which was, it's unusual in a lot of ways. I mean, first of all, the restrictions on the Medal of Honor are, I think you have like a 15-year limit. You have to get nominated within a certain time period, and it has to be approved in a certain. Well, of course, this is 140, 150 years later. So it was unusual. And most Medal of Honor winners are enlisted men. There's very few officers. So it was interesting that he was able to get it in that he was an officer, and it was 156 or 150 years later. But very deservedly so. And the more I learned about him, I was like, oh my God, this guy's story is just as interesting as William's, even though the two of them were completely different personalities. And yet they were very devoted to each other. In fact, one of the things I point out in the book is the fact that when Will learned that Lonnie, and that's that they call them Lon or Lonnie, when he learned that he had died at the Battle of Gettysburg, he immediately put in for a transfer to the Army, hoping to take over Lonnie's artillery division or regiment. And the Army said, no, we're not going to do that. And in the book, I say, actually, that was to the betterment of everybody. I mean, not just for him, but for the war itself, because the stuff he did in the Navy was incredible. So both of them are just very interesting. But yeah, I just read a lot of books on the two of them. Of course, I have collections of the letters they wrote and a lot of family memorabilia. I do have William's journals, so that I was able to read those. And when I say, in fact, a lot of the dialogue that goes into this book are actual quotes from these guys, but normally from letters, from journal entries, whatever. I just incorporated into the action of the story. But both of them are completely different personalities, but both very devoted to the Union. And both really made their mark. I mean, what both of them did. Of course, William over a much longer period, because Lonnie died before he was even 23. So,
wow. Well, how long did it take you to put all of the research together then?
Oh, geez. Well, I probably started gathering it, not writing it up, but gathering it together in notes and stuff when I started back in the 90s on the sort of the campaign to get Lon the Medal of Honor. I started pulling this stuff together and probably started writing it up. Oh, God, got to be 7 or 8 years ago. And just slowly, and it's funny because one of the reviews on Amazon, the person who posted it said, my only complaint is it's too short a book. I said, well, believe me, it started a lot longer than what I got. It was just, I decided, no, I got to pair this. One of the and this is why I made it such a short book. I'm hoping that this is a book that will appeal to, history teachers, classes, high school, college folks. Was that there's a lot of books out there about the two of them that are very dense and very detailed, but also, unless you're a history buff, just incredibly dull. Just not a lot of action. And so that's what I was trying to do, is say, look, these guys were real living human beings with foibles. And certainly William had his, he's probably one of the more, in fact, I always like to say that, you hear that if you could spend an hour with anybody, you could. I would definitely love to get some of the stories from this guy I haven't heard, because I'm sure they must be juicy.
That's funny. Well, and it is an easy read, and it is interesting because you're right. There are history textbooks out there. They try so hard. You can tell that they want to make it interesting, but you're just going, I don't care. But no, yours is very, it moves. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of funny because actually when I returned to school, I intended to major in history, but got sidetracked into it. But I always love telling my classes, I said, well, unfortunately for you, I'm both an English professor and a history buff. So, if you don't like history, then I'm a double whammy. But I always say, if you talk to most people, well, why didn't you like history? And they always say, well, it's boring. I said, well, here's the thing. No, history in and of itself is not boring. Now, history teachers can be incredibly boring. And that's the problem. I was lucky. I was one of those people. I think I only had one history teacher my whole life that was boring. And it was a 1-semester class in high school. And by that time, I was old enough to realize, okay, it's him. It's not the other. So I just get through this class and I don't have to worry about it anymore. But yeah, most of the history teachers I had from probably 5th grade on were just incredibly good teachers. And in fact, I've tried to incorporate a lot of their techniques into my own teaching methods because I was just so impressed with some of these people.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think to be a good history teacher, you have to be a good storyteller. Like, you have to be able to bring what happened so many
Yeah,
hundreds of years ago to life. And if you're not a good storyteller, which, being a writer and a storyteller, I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand. If you can't tell a story, you probably shouldn't be a writer.
yeah. Well, and it's funny you mentioned that too, because that's one of my big things when I teach is people always say, somebody should write a book about my life. It'd be an interesting story. And my argument is always this: everybody's life is an interesting story. Unfortunately, not everybody's an interesting storyteller. That's the difference.
That's perfect.
And the good writers know what to give you, what to leave out, when to give you what they're giving you. I said, that's what makes this person more interesting than any other. Because I think one of my favorite writers is John Gardner of the American writers. I mean, I love Vonnegut, of course, but John Gardner, I've always been knocked out by his stuff. And he is another one of those that is a good model where he brings history into his books in a very fascinating way, to me at least.
Oh, yeah. So when you're writing, historical nonfiction versus your poetry, like, do you have to be in a completely different state of mind to kind of transfer?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think my interest in poetry, I think, helps all the other writing.
Okay.
But no, it is different in that I can put details in that I might leave out in a poem. But even, and here again, I might have mentioned it when we last met, is like, I've always loved Donald Justice, who said a good poem should appear cinematic. And, you should be able to unspool it like a movie, which I think the really good, I mean, you read, I mean, one of my favorites is Shelley's Ozymandias, which if you read that, you can picture it as a movie. Robert Frost, a lot of his stuff, I think, is very well done in that way. I don't know if you've read Carolyn Forche and her writings when she was in El Salvador, which is unbelievably interesting. I don't think I would have wanted to go through the experience to collect that information. Kudos to her.
Yeah.
So I think that, having focused on poetry for so many years, and I still write a lot of poetry. I'm still doing it. But that only helps in the other, in terms of creating imagery and but I think, writing narrative, it's a little different.
Oh, yeah. Well, you can use more words for sure.
Yeah.
You have a larger palette with which you can paint. And so, yeah, that's my problem. When I sit down to write lyrics or, really bad poetry or whatever, even with my novels, my editor's like, Jennifer, that's too many words.
Yeah. Well, you can always requote, what was it from Amadeus? Too many notes.
Yeah. Yep. My symphony goes on and on and on and on and on. So did you find it was also different, and I'm just trying to, get the dichotomy here. Like, is it different trying to publish and market a project like this versus your other work?
I think it was more difficult only in that I'm so tapped into the poetry market now that I have more connections. And this one, now one thing, and if you notice on the cover, the foreword was written by General Lord, which I was so happy to get him to do that. Because he's a career Army guy, still very well respected. I think he's now running the military wing of Austin Peay University, where they work with veterans and stuff. But that was a nice coup for me, getting him to do the introduction, which was great. And a couple of others, here again, a couple of the reviews that I got on Amazon are from former military people who, understand that mindset and what it's like. So, certainly none of us went through the Civil War. But,
right. That was just a little before our time, but yeah. Did you learn anything interesting about your family you didn't know before?
Well, I think the most interesting was how closely I thought the connection was a lot further than it turned out to be, but it turns out we are fifth cousins, so cousins 5 times removed, which is still, any blood relatives or anything, but it's still close enough. But in other words, I guess it was their fifth great grandfather was my eighth great grandfather. But and just I think also learning about their family, because that to me, there were 4 brothers. Every one of them served in one form or another. It's just that these 2 were the real standouts in terms of the heroics. But one brother, the oldest, could not actually serve in the military, but he was like a paymaster or something like that because I think he had asthma or something, couldn't fight. And then the second oldest was a cavalry guy who actually died in the Apache Wars. So, all 4 of them. Now, I think what's most interesting is their father died when William was about 4 years old. So you think of that. This single mother raised these 4 guys, which is enough of a task.
Ooh.
And all 4 of them served very well. And then there was one daughter as well. So, she raised 5 kids on her own.
Bless her heart.
And I think one of the other things, one of the stories, because coming in, Alonzo was a new personality to me. I think one of the, I don't think I put it in the book, but one of the ironic parts of his life is that at one point their mother had said, because Alonzo was very disciplined, very responsible, very focused. And the mother once said that, I think Alonzo is the son who will take care of me when I'm older. Well, of course, he died when he was 22, but because he died in battle, his mother got a pension. So in many ways, she was right.
Wow.
He did provide for her later on because he died during the war. So I think that was kind of interesting. Like I said, I didn't put that in the book because it felt a little extraneous, but it was just, and here again, having grown up with the stories of William and knowing him and then learning about Lonnie and saying, oh my God, these guys, we're completely different.
Yeah.
I think about, all right, my sister and I, we had and still have a very good relationship. We had similarities. We were both attracted to certain things that we still share. She did artwork. I was in the writing and stuff. Of course, I always laugh with her. She became a neonatal ICU nurse. And I always said, you're the girl who cried for 2 weeks when your goldfish died, and now you're dealing with kids. She says, yeah, it's heartbreaking, but I love it. So
wow. Yeah, I do love, I love seeing opposite siblings, but I don't know what that's like because I'm with you. Like my sister, she's my editor, right? Like we're the same person. It's like all the time the same person. So yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. But
okay. So do you think you'll write more narratives like this, or are you going to venture back into poetry?
Well, I'm actually now I'm editing 2 memoirs now. I have written 2 others. One is about my own time in the Navy and after, but that needs, I'm thinking, I wrote it up. The problem is it is too long. It's just too long. Like twice as long as it should be. And even if I cut it down by a third, it's still too long. Like what I'm thinking of doing is taking that and turning it into a novel. But the other memoir is, and I don't remember if I mentioned this before, but I had been married before and my previous wife died of cancer. So I wrote a book sort of depicting our relationship and her battle with cancer, which is done, but it still needs some editing on that. But it's pretty much done. So that will probably be the next thing I go out with. But I'm still writing the poems. I'm still writing short stories, working on one now about World War II. about the D-Day invasion. This is fictional, of course, but and I've written a couple of other. I did write one short story about the Enola Gay, which is the plane that dropped the atom bomb. So yeah, I still get involved in that. And I'm starting to get enough poems built up. I might start looking at another book, but yeah, I think that's going to be a year or two down the line. But I'm also motivated by the fact that I'm now 72 years old. So,
it's time.
Yeah, the expiration date is sneaking up. So I better get my butt in gear.
I mean, you're retired. What else is there, honestly?
Yeah, well, that's why it's been nice is, since I retired, I've been able to devote a lot more time to this stuff. Well, last year I came out with the 3 books, this one, the poetry book, and the nonfiction, the memories, which is called Time Well Spent. It's just a collection of short narratives about my own life. Which is why I'm thinking, I can take the memoir about the Navy and kind of fictionalize it and still keep it in there, keep, the essence of it there, but also cut out. Because when I was writing that, I felt like I had to account for every year.
Yeah.
When it might not have anything to do. So I could condense it. And I'm thinking of modeling that after the Norwegian tale of Peer Gynt, which I've always found very interesting. It's an old fable of theirs. An interesting character who I identify with to a great degree. Parts kind of, he means well, but he keeps screwing up.
That's funny. My editor, slash sister, has the same qualm with me. She's like, "Hey, that's too many words. You've got to cut it." And I have such hard times because I think everybody needs to know every detail.
Yeah.
But I want the details. Not everybody else wants them.
Yeah. The problem is that within those details are some funny stories, and I'm trying to keep those, without sacrificing, I mean, how do I fit them in? But I'll find a way, I think.
Oh, no doubt about that. So we are at our halfway point here where we can flip the script if you're interested. Would you like to take over the show?
Well, in what way would you?
Well, you get to be the host, so you choose the topic and we run with it.
All right. Well, why don't I do this? Just introduce. Would you like me to focus on this book or?
Your choice.
Okay.
This is your show. I'm no longer part of. I'm just here.
Well, I'll read some sections from the book just to give people an idea. And this is at the beginning. And it is funny. I don't know if you noticed, but in the book, the first section, which is about Lon, is called The Last Man, whereas the final section about William is called The First Seal. So, nice. In essence, the first shall be last and the last first. Oh. Anyhow, this is in the part about Lonnie. And basically the reason The Last Man is actually from a poem that was written about him, about Lon, as being the last man at the cannon. And the first seal for William is, in many ways, he was the original commando, a guy who operated independently without a large contingent of people. And that's basically, I don't know if you've had a chance to read through the book, but it's mostly because he just wasn't very good at following orders.
I mean,
and so the Navy just finally said, well, look, you're not listening to us, but everything you do seems to work out. So you tell us what you'd like in charge. To do. And but run it by us. Just let us approve it and, know what's going on. So, we have an idea what you're doing. But, here again, the sinking of the Albemarle, I mean, that was such a major event. They were like, how do we get this thing? And finally said, well, look, this guy. And I think that's what made William so interesting was that at a time, and I think I bring it out in the book, is at a time when Annapolis was very conservative, very traditional, which is one of the reasons they didn't like him. The faculty was not unhappy getting rid of him. But yeah, it was very staid in many ways. He was one of those guys, hey, if he didn't respect you, he was going to let you know it. And it didn't matter whether he was a student and you were the faculty, no matter. Anyhow, but let me go into this. So I'm going to start with the part with talking about Lon and William. And it said, it says, Lon wondered how Will was faring. Born less than 22 months apart, the two grew up inseparable and devoted to each other. Yet they lived their lives in vastly different ways, each distinct in his own personality. Lon was contemplative, while Will lived so impulsively as to be almost impetuous. The older was ambitious and meticulous, the younger audacious and mercurial. As an officer, Lon exhibited the deliberation of a chess master, always staying aware of possible consequences. Lon rooted his decisions in probabilities and reality. Will never envisioned any outcome other than success. So that sort of sums up the two brothers pretty nicely, I think. Like I say, Lon did make a name for himself very early on. I mean, when he first got out of West Point, they put him with the artillery, but they liked what they saw in him, and they moved him into what they call topographical engineers, who were the guys who planned the battles. And this was sort of the elite of the Army at the time. But he wanted to get back he wanted the action, so he got moved back into the artillery. And so it was at the Battle of Gettysburg where he really made his mark. And that's, of course, where he died. Once Pickett began his charge, among the heaviest hit were the positions near Lon. Lon had 3 guns, but only enough men to operate 2 of them. Infantrymen, most of them attached to the Pennsylvania 71st, were called to replace wounded artillerymen. The replacements themselves soon became casualties. One Pennsylvanian was so badly wounded, he pleaded for anyone to put him out of his misery. When no one would, he pulled out his pistol and ended his own life. So that's sort of what the battlefield was like during that. Around 1:40 in the afternoon, a cannonball exploded near Lon, its fragments tearing open both his thighs, ripping cloth and flesh and his genitals as it went by, becoming his first wound. He stayed his post. A little after 2:30, or a little before 2:30, the Confederate infantry began its slow march toward Lon's position, in a line stretching almost a mile across, presenting a show of strength so massive that one Union officer later described it as, quote, magnificent, grim, and irresistible. If such was the case, then Lon and his troops became the object to the South's irresistible force. And then, just to sum up, this is bleeding out from his earlier wounds. Lon realized this was his last day on Earth. He stopped intestines from spilling out by clamping the flat side of a stray food canteen against his stomach. Leaning against his remaining cannon, Lon sucked at a fleshless thumb. He had not been wearing the padded leather glove that protected handlers from the searing heat of venting gases that escaped after each volley, so that finger had been burned to the bone. So that's, when he died, he went out with some pretty severe wounds.
Yeah, to think that he lasted as long as he did.
Yeah. And there were several cases where his first sergeant says, look, why don't you get back there, get a medical? It's just, nope, I'm not leaving. And this is here again why, and I think I did put it in there. Let's see. Yeah, in the poem, John Brown's Body, Stephen Vincent Benet called him the last man at the last gun. And then I have that portion of the poem, a stanza from the poem that, depicts him. And then from that time forward, the Battery A 4th Artillery Regiment would exist under the name of Cushing's Battery. He was definitely an interesting character. Here again, one of the things, and I think I bring it up in the book, I don't remember if I did or not, but they said that nobody advanced quite as rapidly through the ranks as Lon did, with the possible exception of George Armstrong Custer. So,
Wow.
so yeah. Uh, and Custer was interesting too, because I think he was a year ahead of him at West Point. But yeah, it is very interesting looking at these two guys and realizing how different they were.
That is amazing. And I'm guessing that, did you learn anything about history you didn't know just in general while you were doing all this research?
Well, I learned a lot about Gettysburg because I was, in fact, I'm now tapped into several sites, Facebook pages, websites that focus on the battle. And I have to credit, there's a guy named Paul Hemphill, who's a writer about Gettysburg primarily and the Civil War. And he gave me a lot of feedback. I mean, as I was writing the Lonnie piece, I would send him what I had and he would make corrections. Say, no, that's not accurate there. So he was able to really give me a lot of help on that. So that was nice to have. And I still don't, I mean, I am nowhere near. There's also a woman, Teresa Scott, who has been incredibly helpful on this book. She is, in fact, I think she actually works in Gettysburg as a historian. So, but it's interesting because she's a big Lonnie fan. In fact, I think one of the pictures is from her. The other one I got to meet, and I mentioned him in the book, is Captain Arnold. Well, Kimberly Arnold and I have connected, and she's related to the Captain Arnold. And when I came out with the book, she said, "Look at that, the Arnolds and the Cushings together again," after all these years. But because they were very good friends. I think Arnold was a little bit older than he. But
well, that is awesome. I love when things like that happen. It shows you how small the world is sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny. All right, Bill. Well, tell listeners how they can connect with you and your work.
Well, obviously the biggest way is through the email that, which I welcome you to post, the Yahoo email.
Okay.
I do have a website, and it's called let's see, what's it called? I think it's My Writer Online. mywriteronline.net. Although I have to confess, I'm not as religiously diligent on that as I should be. Although, believe me, I am going to be posting a lot of stuff up there in the next few weeks.
I bet you're going to put the pictures and all that kind of thing up there.
Oh, yeah. Well, we just, here again, with the poetry, I just got through. I mean, it was National Poetry Month last year. So I was able to bring Chuck in, the musician I work with, and we did a couple of shows. In fact, he's taken off tomorrow morning, going back to New York.
Nice.
So I think I might have mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned him before.
You did, like you do poetry along with their music.
Yeah. But he and I grew up across the street from each other in New York. And when I went in the Navy in 1970 and then sort of disappeared from town. And then in 2016, so 45 plus years later, we found each other in LA. So now whenever he's in town, we try and line up things, or he tries to make, like I said, we had National Poetry Month. So I said, hey, look, there's a lot of stuff going on. We did a Lit Fest. We did an appearance at a library, at a coffee shop. And then actually the one I really enjoyed, and he certainly enjoyed it greatly, there's a group in town that works with disabled older people that, trying to teach them skills and that sort of thing. And we did an appearance there where we planned it out with the group beforehand, where the people that are in the group wrote their own poems and then came up and Chuck would play along with them. And they got a kick out of it. What pleased me was how much Chuck was like, oh, that was so great.
Oh, no, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that. And then, of course, your book is on Amazon, yes?
It is on Amazon, yeah. Yeah, or I can, if anybody wants a signed copy, they can
That's right.
contact me and let me know, and we'll work out a price that'll include the postage. Try and make it as reasonable as I can.
That's generous of you because shipping is ridiculous these days.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I'll make sure that all of that is in the show notes, your email address and all of that. Yeah. And then I have one last final question. It's the same question that I always ask. Are you ready for your big question?
Okay, sure.
All right. What is one piece of advice or encouragement you want listeners to walk away with if they hear nothing else?
Well, I guess, in terms of writing or in terms of anything?
Life, love, the pursuit of happiness.
Let me dovetail off this, because one of the things, one of my favorite stories actually is, and as you know, all right, I didn't go back to school till I was 38 or 37, whatever it was. I was 40 before I even hit the university, and then graduated at 45, I guess, or 44. But one of the things I found amusing when I was working on my master's, that was when I was living in Puerto Rico and I was teaching high school there. And one of my senior girls was talking with me one day, and she said, I feel so useless. And I said, well, why? She says, well, I don't know what I want to major in. I said, let me tell you something. I was 40 when I was in school, and I changed my major 3 times. So don't put the pressure on yourself. If I didn't know what the hell I was doing at 40, you're 18. You got plenty of time. Don't worry about making mistakes. So, and I think that's one of the things is, when in my writing, I'm very big on the writing groups because they can show you the mistakes you're not seeing. And, if you're looking to do things perfectly, well, good luck. You're just going to drive yourself nuts.
Yes.
In fact, that is one of my big arguments. The last time we saw perfection would have to be Nadia Comaneci, and I think that was 1984. So, and before that, what do you got? Maybe Mozart. Perfection doesn't, it doesn't happen that often. So.
Yes, and you know what? You don't see all of the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into reaching that perfection. You know, like there's a struggle there that you have to get through in order to reach perfection. So do your best.
Well, except I will give Mozart this; he was a genius. So
absolutely.
I don't think it's fair to compare anybody with him.
Well, okay, we'll let you have that one, but for the most part,
I mean, I think like Nathaniel Hawthorne, who edited endlessly. I never met a writer worth a damn that didn't say, the trick is editing. You got to, and I might have said this last time I was on, but one of my favorite statements on writing is write without fear, edit without mercy.
I need that posted somewhere very large in my office. Yeah, no, that's fantastic.
But I think that's the biggest thing, I think, for most people, especially just starting out in whatever career or pursuit. You're not going to get it right the first time. And if that's what you're looking for, you're going to be disappointed every time. So,
isn't that the truth? Oh, my goodness. And I wish that somebody had told me that a long time ago. Yeah. But, here we are. 40 years later, I'm finally figuring it out.
Yeah.
That's so great. Well, Bill, again, thank you so much for being here and hanging out and having this conversation. I loved this book. I love history just like you do. And I loved just getting to know people that I had never heard of before. I'm not even gonna lie. Like they just weren't in my history books. And so I really.
And I think these two are very fascinating in so many ways. I say very different, but devoted to each other. And one of the things, and it's funny because I did an interview not long ago, and I was saying a big difference between these two guys is that Alonzo was very much a believer in the Union's devotion to eradicating slavery. William was more, I'm a warrior, just point me in the direction. Give me an enemy, that's all I'm asking for. And so he was not very political, but he was certainly, very daring.
He was willing to fight for whatever cause as long as he got to fight.
Yeah, I'm up.
That's so funny. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and that I can't wait to hear what your next book is. You'll have to come on here and tell us about it the next time
I
your
will keep
project.
in touch with you and anything new coming up. Yeah, hopefully it'll be the memoir about my wife or my late wife.
Yeah.
I really want to get that done, but I've got some other things I'm working on. But that's probably the most important and probably the least labor intensive that I got in front of me. So I really need to get to that.
Well, now's a good time. Better than never.
Yep.